A person starts to live when he can live outside himself. Have you ever felt like you were just existing? As if each day were merely a repetition of the last, with no clear purpose, no real meaning? Maybe at some point, everything that once felt certain began to lose its significance. The solid ground beneath you crumbled. The answers that once seemed sufficient no longer made sense. And then, that unsettling feeling arises. A sensation that's hard to describe, yet impossible to ignore. It's as if something deep inside you keeps asking, over and over again, why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? If you've ever felt this way, know that you're not alone. These were the very same questions that haunted one of the greatest writers of all time, Leo Tolstoy. The author of classics like War and Peace and Anna Karenina went through a crisis so profound that it completely transformed his worldview and influenced generations to come. Tolstoy had everything most people would consider a perfect life: a vast estate, a loving family, a devoted wife, prestige, wealth, and literary acclaim. Yet despite all of this, something inside him was falling apart. The breaking point, when he turned 50, Tolstoy plunged into an overwhelming existential crisis. A man who had always found joy in the pleasures of life now found himself questioning his very existence. Why? What happened? How did a man who had everything reach a point where he no longer wanted to live? The truth is, this crisis didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the result of an inner restlessness that had been growing inside him for years. And to truly understand what happened, we need to go back in time. The roots of Tolstoy's restlessness. From a young age, Tolstoy deeply questioned Christianity. Losing his parents at an early age left him with a profound sense of abandonment and disillusionment. Religion, instead of providing refuge, felt to him like a fragile system upheld only by blind faith and social pressure. He once wrote, "Religious doctrine, accepted by faith and sustained by external pressure, slowly falls apart under the influence of knowledge and life experience." Tolstoy was never a man of absolute certainties. His mind was always restless, always searching for something beyond what he was taught. And over time, this inner turmoil only grew stronger. As a young man, he fought in the Crimean War, an experience that deeply scarred him. He witnessed the brutality of battle, the suffering of men, and the fragile nature of life itself. Tolstoy returned from the war disillusioned, with a strong aversion to violence and a deep skepticism towards state authority. It was during this period that he fully devoted himself to literature, but even that would not be enough to silence his growing existential doubts. His books conquered the world. Tolstoy's works gained international recognition. In 1862, he married Sophia Behrs, and together they had 13 children. His estate in Yasnaya Polyana became a haven for creativity and a gathering place for intellectuals and artists of the time. To the outside world, Tolstoy appeared to be a fulfilled man, a celebrated writer, a respected thinker, and a man of great wealth and influence. But on the inside, he was drowning in silent anguish, the onset of the crisis. As he approached 50, something began to change. Tolstoy felt an ever-growing existential agony. The weight of his thoughts became so overwhelming that sleep was his only escape, a brief moment of relief from the relentless bombardment of questions about life, death, and purpose. In his essay, A Confession, he revealed a chilling truth about this period of his life. Tolstoy had to convince himself every day not to end his own life. Nihilism had consumed his mind, trapping him in a vicious cycle of obsessive, unanswered questions. What is the meaning of life if, in the end, we all die? What happens after death? What is the value of wealth, fame, or achievements if everything is temporary? Then came one terrifying realization, a single thought that summed up his despair. If not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then in 30 years. Does it make any difference? He was standing at the edge of an abyss, but instead of giving in, he made a radical decision. If life had no meaning, he would set out to find one. The search for meaning. Determined to find answers, Tolstoy embarked on a deep journey of self-discovery and spirituality. He searched for meaning in science, philosophy, and political ideologies. But nothing seemed to provide a truly satisfying answer. And then he turned his gaze towards something he had always rejected: faith. What did Tolstoy discover on this journey? How did he find a new purpose for living? And how did this transformation not only change his own life, but also influence generations to come? That is the story we are about to explore. Because maybe, just maybe, the answers he found could also help you find your own path. The Parable of the Man and the Well, a reflection on life. In his relentless search for answers, Leo Tolstoy came across a powerful symbol for his existential crisis, a parable that he would later include in his work, A Confession. The story tells of a man who, while fleeing from a wild beast, falls into an abandoned well. Desperate at the last moment, he grabs onto a branch growing from the wall of the well, barely avoiding a fatal fall. But when he looks down, he sees something terrifying. At the bottom of the well, a dragon with its mouth wide open awaits, ready to devour him. He is trapped. He can't climb back up because the beast is still lurking above, and he can't let go because the dragon is waiting below. And then, as he hangs there, something catches his eye. Tiny drops of honey begin to drip from the leaves of the branch. Despite the imminent danger, he reaches out, tastes the honey, and for a brief moment, he forgets the tragedy surrounding him. The symbolism behind the parable. For Tolstoy, this parable was a reflection of human existence itself. The man in the well represented all of humanity, trapped between the fear of life, symbolized by the beast above, the inevitability of death, represented by the dragon below, and in between, the fleeting pleasures of life, like the drops of honey, small, sweet distractions that, while enjoyable, fail to answer life's deepest questions. If life was nothing more than an endless struggle between fear and death, then what was the point of it all? Was existence just a cruel, meaningless cycle? Tolstoy refused to succumb to despair. Instead, he dove even deeper into his search for meaning, science, philosophy, and the void of existence. Tolstoy first turned to philosophy and science, searching for an explanation that could fill the emptiness inside him. But the more he studied, the more frustrated he became. The great philosophical theories provided him with analyses of the world, but not a purpose for life. He read the most renowned thinkers, hoping to find a sense of hope, but instead he felt the weight of nihilism growing heavier on his shoulders. Science, on the other hand, seemed indifferent to his anguish. For example, The Darwinian view of the world struck him as cold and mechanical, as if human beings were nothing more than cosmic accidents, mere clusters of cells destined to fade into oblivion. Science explains the mechanisms of life, Tolstoy reflected, but it does not answer the greatest question of all: why live? Unable to find solace in philosophy or science, Tolstoy shifted his attention to the people around him, and that's when he noticed something interesting. Everyone faced the question of existence in different ways. According to him, there were 4 main ways people dealt with the absurdity of life. The 4 paths in the face of life's absurdity. The first group consisted of those who simply ignored the problem. They did not dwell on the meaning of life. Was existence absurd? Maybe. But did that matter? Not to them. They simply went about their daily routines, keeping themselves busy, never allowing their minds to question too deeply. This perspective would later resonate with Albert Camus, who argued that, in the face of existential emptiness, one could simply move forward, adopting an attitude of "so what?" accept the absurd, and keep living. But Tolstoy could not ignore the questions that his mind kept demanding answers to. He was incapable of living in ignorance when everything inside him screamed for meaning. The second group sought to fill the void with fleeting pleasures. Wealth, relationships, fame, entertainment, everything became a form of escape. The fear of death and the meaninglessness of life were silenced through an endless pursuit of pleasure. But Tolstoy saw this as a fragile and temporary solution. He compared it to the honey in the parable of the man in the well, sweet for a moment, but completely incapable of changing the harsh reality surrounding it. The third group was the most tragic, those who found no strength to continue. These individuals, crushed by the weight of existence, saw no way out. They felt trapped by the meaninglessness of life, to the point where they began to believe that the only escape was the end itself. Tolstoy himself flirted with this idea. The thought of ending everything crossed his mind many times, but something inside him refused to accept this fate. If life had no meaning, then he had to find one. If you, like Tolstoy, have ever felt lost in an existential crisis, know that this does not have to be the end. The answers may not come immediately, but they do exist, and in time, they reveal themselves. The fourth and final group consisted of those who recognized life's lack of meaning, but didn't know what to do about it. They did not surrender to pleasure, nor did they give in to despair, but they also found no hope. They remained trapped in existential limbo, stagnant between their awareness of suffering and their lack of strength to act. Tolstoy knew that he belonged to this last group, and that terrified him. But he had reached his limit. Tolstoy had searched for answers in philosophy, in science, in pleasure, and even in despair. Yet none of these paths had given him the solace he so desperately sought. But it was in that moment, when he seemed to have nowhere left to turn, that Tolstoy made a radical decision. He shifted his focus towards something he had always rejected: faith. What did he discover in his spiritual journey? How did he find a new purpose for living? And how did his transformation impact generations to come? That is the question we are about to answer. Because maybe the path that Tolstoy found could also be the key to your own journey. Between existence and inertia, the weakest way to live. Some people, when faced with existential emptiness, do nothing. They do not reject life, but they do not embrace it either. They remain in a state of passive resignation, fully aware of life's lack of meaning, yet too exhausted to confront it. This is not an active decision to keep living. It is an automatic survival, a spiritual exhaustion that keeps them trapped between existence and inertia. For Tolstoy, this was the weakest way to live, because it offered neither resolution nor progress. The individual understood the absurdity and suffering of life, yet remained paralyzed, incapable of finding peace or meaning. But then, something changed. During his search for the meaning of life, Tolstoy studied different philosophical and religious traditions, immersed himself in the works of humanity's greatest thinkers, and closely observed the people around him. And it was in that moment that he noticed something that would change his life forever: the peasant's faith, a defining moment. Tolstoy, one of the most respected intellectuals of his time, a man of vast philosophical and literary knowledge, found himself deeply shaken by what he observed in the peasants. These people lived in extreme hardship, surrounded by poverty and suffering, and yet they carried within them an unshakable faith in God. This faith gave them purpose, strength, and resilience, even in the face of pain. Tolstoy, on the other hand, had wealth, status, and intellectual success, but none of it brought him satisfaction, and this contrast deeply unsettled him. How can someone who has everything feel so lost, while those who have nothing find peace? He realized that while he was drowning in his own existential crisis, the peasants lived with a clear purpose, untouched by the paralyzing doubts that tormented him. Their simple yet unwavering conviction stood in stark contrast to his own intellectual turbulence, and that made him question everything: the clash between reason and faith. Tolstoy firmly believed that reason and logic were the ultimate tools for understanding the world. But now, he found himself confronted with something his mind could not explain. Faith, which had always seemed to him like a blind leap into the unknown, began to reveal itself as a possible answer. He realized that life could not be understood through intellect alone. It was necessary to believe in something greater than the material world. This understanding became a turning point in his journey. Even though his rational mind resisted, Tolstoy began to see faith not as a naive concept, but as the only path capable of transcending the limitations of human existence. Human suffering was inevitable and fleeting, but the presence of God provided a greater purpose, something that extended beyond the brevity of life. And so, Tolstoy found the answer his soul had been searching for all along: a life transformed. From that moment on, his life was never the same. He realized that the meaning of life was not found in glory, wealth, or success, but in compassion, humility, and service to others. Inspired by this discovery, Tolstoy radically transformed his way of living. He adopted a simpler life, distancing himself from the luxuries of aristocracy. He rejected many of the privileges that came with his social status. He sought inspiration in the teachings of Christ, but found no solace in the Russian Orthodox Church, which he saw as corrupt and disconnected from the true spiritual principles of Christianity. Tolstoy found in the Sermon on the Mount a message of justice, love, and humility, one that would shape his new worldview. But this transformation was not just a personal philosophy. It profoundly influenced his writings. In A Confession, Tolstoy openly shared his existential anguish and his search for meaning. His words deeply resonated with thousands of people, many of whom were struggling with the same emptiness and uncertainty. However, this transformation came at a high price: the conflict with his family and his final departure. Tolstoy's new philosophy was not well received by his family, especially by his wife, Sophia. She could not accept his rejection of material wealth, nor his desire to give away his properties and renounce the copyrights of his works. Tensions grew. A marriage that had once been harmonious turned into a battleground of emotions. Tolstoy, who had spent his entire life seeking inner peace, now faced a new dilemma. How could he follow his spiritual path without destroying the bonds he once held dear? In 1910, at 82 years old, Tolstoy made a radical decision. He fled from home. On a cold October night, he secretly left Yasnaya Polyana, taking with him only his doctor and his daughter, Alexandra. He longed to live even more simply, far from conflict and the suffocating pressures of society. But his health was already failing. During the journey, he fell ill, and just days later, on November 20th, 1910, he passed away at a small railway station in Ostapovo. His final moments were marked by deep serenity. Despite everything, Tolstoy departed in peace. Tolstoy's legacy, far beyond literature, Tolstoy's existential crisis was not merely a personal struggle. It became a source of inspiration for generations, encouraging people to reflect on simplicity, justice, and the search for a deeper meaning in life. His journey proves that even in the face of the deepest anguish, it is possible to rediscover purpose and redefine one's existence. Tolstoy found in spirituality and service to others the answers to his deepest questions. And in doing so, he not only transformed his own life, he changed the lives of millions of readers around the world. And now I ask you, what is the meaning of your journey?